Okay. That's lovely. Yeah. So maybe Jon, I know the book is based around like that question and then two other questions. I mean, I don't know the best way to get into this. I mean, do you just want to give people the very high level summary and then we'll dig in? So what is it? Yeah.
So like I say, I started off with that question, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly? Stepped away and started to try and find other questions and essentially came up with the question, what would it look like to put all that creative energy into involving people in the world as citizens, and then started to build kind of really sort of delve into that from all sorts of different angles. I ended up going and doing another master's degree in philosophy, working at the National Trust for a while, and then starting a business, and always trying to kind of work with these ideas and interrogate them further. And where I've really come out, I guess, and why and what felt like it was in place in order to enable me to write a book was feeling some sort of confidence in the ideas and then seeing them sort of coming alive in the world and feeling like it would be, I sort of had to offer it up. So we'll come back to that, but the core set of ideas in the book, I talk about a way of seeing the moment in time we're living in through the lens of story, basically. And I think we're living in a time when too often we can only see probably two possible futures. There's a future which is a sort of a back to normal, as it were, a continuation of what I call the consumer story. Or there's a future which is looming quite dangerously, which is a sort of authoritarian future, which represents what I call the subject story. And I think what I'm looking to do in the book is name and make visible and possible another future. And so if I just say a word about the three stories I work with, this framework of subject, consumer, and citizen, essentially it's an argument that humans are by nature collaborative, creative, empathic creatures, citizens, but we are also storytelling and story-dwelling creatures. And what we do, we draw our ideas, we draw our information about what is the right thing to do from the stories that surround us. And so the subject story, dominant in the world for a very long time until the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, says something like the right thing to do is to keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given, because the God-given few who rule society know best, and they will lead us to the best outcomes for society as a whole. So it's a kind of moral story. It's an idea of what's right and what's good. And then at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, Industrial Revolution, rise of the middle class, etc. And that story more or less collapsed in on itself. And we might want to talk about like the relationship of that to the two world wars. I don't know, but out of the two world wars, we more or less explicitly and more or less deliberately stepped into a different story of ourselves and created institutions to buttress that story and carry that story. And that story was the consumer. And so if the subject was keep your head down, do as you're told, the consumer story says, look out for number one, get the best deal for yourself, look out for choose the best option for you from those that are offered, on the basis that if everyone pursues individual self-interest, if organizations pursue their own self-interest, then that will add up to the best for society as a whole. So it's a thesis about how the best outcomes for society will result. And what I'm really arguing about this moment in time is that just as the subject story fell apart before, the consumer story is falling apart now under its own, the sort of the basic lies of it are no longer sustaining or sustainable in the most imminent and immediate sense of the word. And what might be coming through is what I call the citizen story. So subject, keep your head down, do as told. Consumer, look out for number one. Citizen says something like get involved, contribute your ideas, energy, and resources to the pursuit of the understanding of what the best outcome for society as a whole might be, because all of us are smarter than any of us, all of us are better than any of us, and so by tapping into that collective intelligence and collective capacity, that's how the best society will result. And I think, like I say, that the idea of the book really is to say, we can only, too much of the time right now, we can only really see a consumer future or a subject future. And I think by what I'm hope to do is to sort of name and thereby make more visible the possibility of another way of doing things, and then in some of the books sort of actually offer some stories and some real kind of inspiration to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I thank you. I mean, I loved I loved reading it. I really liked the fact the story runs all the way through this. I mean, you tell 5 individual stories of people who are working in this way. You refer to, I think, deep story, and it's a historian that I don't know, Ali somebody, I can't remember.
Ollie Hochschild,
yeah, and the place of deep story in Germany and this kind of thing. And then you move on to all of your stuff about how to change a story, which I found very really practical. So it's I think maybe the next place to go would be kind of what do you want to happen with, because people read this book? I mean, who's it for and what do you want them to do?
I mean, there's two audiences really, and maybe I'll say a word about like why I actually wrote the book, like what the sort of proximate cause of doing the writing was, because I think that might help answer that question. So I've worked with these ideas for some time. Like, we founded the New Citizenship Project, Irene, my business partner, and I, back in 2014, and essentially as a kind of research project. How do you do this? How do you work with people as citizens rather than consumers? And having seen this emergence, at least, and then come. Basically, I was starting to write as the pandemic hit, and thinking, well, this makes sense. Makes sense. The time to do it, and so on, as many people did, I think. But then there was a moment. If people remember the day that the messaging changed in the UK, I assume most people on the call are in the UK, and the message changed from stay home to stay alert. And that day was it kind of, I felt like I was. There are some times when you just sort of feel like you're sort of suddenly everything is in sort of vibrant Technicolor, and you're going, and I was just like, I can see it, like this is oh my god, this is what I'm talking about. And really it was, if you think back to what was happening in that time, we had a government that had moved too late and had then gone into actually a subject mode, into the bargain of the subject story as sort of protection and paternalism. And Johnson was talking about COVID as an invisible mugger, and the idea of, and sort of stay home, like that you will save lives, like that's what you can do, like get home, get hunker down. And what we were doing, what we, the people of the country, were doing, and people all over the world, was helping each other, right? Like mutual aid groups are springing up everywhere. Everyone you talk to has got a different story about street bingo or viral kindness postcards, and I can see people smiling, remembering that time. Like if you look around on Gallery View, you can see everyone smiling. It was amazing, right? And my favourite stat was that thing where they're having seen people helping each other. There was this attempt to set up a central function, the NHS first responders, where they were expecting 250,000 people to sign up in 3 weeks, and the website crashed when 750,000 signed up in 48 hours. It's like, wow, this is us, right? And that, I think, is the citizen story kind of emerging. And then as our death rate exceeded Italy's, and we became the place where, like, it was that week, and the message changed, and then there was this big message change from stay home to stay alert. And I went for, and we were all going, what are they doing? Like, red to green, like, are we there? Like, what's happening? And I went for a bike ride, and then I wrote this blog that sort of poured out of me in 8 minutes. and I was just, and I just saw, like, stay home was a subject story phenomenon. We were being citizens, and the shift was from subject story to consumer story. Stay alert was an idea that was about making it all about individual responsibility. Sort of, if you get it now, it's down to your thing. It's your choice what you do, and you get the results that you deserve from that. And basically, if someone over there gets it, then they have been less alert than you, or whatever. And I just thought, I guess that was a moment where I was going, okay, we can't. It's not, the point I'm making isn't so much a kind of this government is awful, although obviously it is, but it's a point that we couldn't even see. Like it was invisible. It wasn't available to us to step into that story. And so what I wanted to do, and I was researching Taiwan at the time, which maybe you might want to I might say a bit more about, but and there was a way of doing this. It was possible, it was happening, and yet it was crushed. And so the reason for us and who it's for, yes, in part it's for us in our communities and in our workplaces to say, like, the work of getting organized and starting to build different ways of doing things is the work. Like, this matters, but it's really primarily the reason for writing the book is for people in positions of power and influence in organizations and institutions, because it's ultimately, I believe that unless, like, we will always be bubbling and surging and building and organizing, because that's who human beings are, however strong the story that tells us not to is. But unless the doors can be opened, unless these moments of the institutions and the systems coming in behind that energy, that there will always be a default to crushing it. And I think that so ultimately the real kind of key audience for this book is people in positions of influence and power, and that doesn't have to be like the Prime Minister. I think there are multiple places that can work, but that's who it's for, and that's why it's written.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a statement in here about a theory of change, and also about a theory of choice. I think you said, you were quoting, was it Rebecca Solnit you were quoting, where you said that choices from a menu does not constitute power. I just love that. And that, I guess, is the heart of the consumer story, right? You get a bunch of things to choose from, and you're arguing for something a bit more radical than that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the heart of it. It's like, and I think the useful part of the usefulness of talking about subject, consumer, and citizen, rather than just counterposing consumer and citizen, is be able to see the attraction and the appeal of the consumer story, why it's so alluring, because from what came before, it does offer a degree, a type of agency, a kind of power. Like, as subjects, all we could do was do as we were told. As consumers, we were good enough to know our own self-interest and to choose between the options offered to us. And yeah, I didn't put this one in the book, but this idea of, like, choice, the blinded by choice. My favorite expression of this is the psychologist Tim Kasser, who works out of the US, tells a lovely story about shopping for underwear for his 4-year-old son. And he says, I went into the store at the airport, and I needed to pick up underwear for my 4-year-old son, and I could choose from the 40 different type pairs of underwear that all had different cartoon characters on, but I couldn't choose any underwear that didn't have cartoon characters on. And he talks about micro choice versus macro choice, which I think is really a nice way of putting it. Like, we're so blinded by the kind of the array of, and then I think it was actually Annie Leonard who first sort of really articulated it in the Story of Stuff. And she talks about, like, the idea that, like, there's all number of choices. Like, we can choose from the menu, but we don't have but what we aren't offered in the consumer story is the ability to get in the kitchen and decide what we're going to cook, right? Like, and I think that's a really powerful way of articulating it. That's the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to ask what might be a difficult question, so prepare yourself, because I get it. I hear the argument for it, and I like it. I just worry on two levels. I mean, this reminds me of, I was a civil servant in the early Thatcher years, and when everything started to be about customer and consumer, and I remember Roger Levitt, who was like a genius civil servant, who was working in the Department of Energy, who got fed up and went off and formed a think tank or joined a think tank. And he wrote a response to this consumerizing everything called A Better Choice of Choices. And I thought it was one of the most fantastic responses to Thatcherism I'd ever seen. And of course, it went nowhere. And I'm just wondering, are you optimistic that this goes somewhere? I mean, it's powerful, it's radical. I can see that people want it, but there's a lot of things that can cause this not to happen, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and I'm not. So optimism is an interesting word. I at the end of the book, Rebecca Song, that you've already mentioned, and she pops up several times through. If people haven't read her stuff, I'd like just do. And particularly a wonderful book called A Paradise Built in Hell, which is probably the kind of manual for our times about human response to catastrophe. But in Hope in the Dark, and I sort of end the book on this note, Song talks about she makes this distinction between hope and optimism. So she says something along the lines of, optimism is the belief that things will be all right no matter what we do. Pessimism is the belief that things are screwed no matter what we do. But both of us excuse us from action. And she says hope is actually a combination of clarity and imagination, the clarity to see the situation of the world for what it is, and the imagination to see that things, these ways are not inevitable and immutable. And I think I'd say to that part of your question, I think my answer would be I'm hopeful, but I'm not necessarily optimistic. I think I think the way I see this moment in time actually is one when all three of these stories, subject, consumer, and citizen, are like, I think we're in a contest at the level of story. Actually, I think we're living in a kind of in an upheaval of story where we don't know. And which story kind of forms and comes through will shape things. I mean, and you can very easily attach possible futures to the other two. Actually, like you can see the rise of China and the sort of the surveillance state as a sort of subject story future that could easily take hold around the world. You can see in Elon Musk and the kind of, if Dogecoin becomes the global reserve currency, and you can see a consumer future where actually the sort of the sovereign individuals kind of take charge, and I think, and I guess what I'm trying to do is make another future visible. So I'm not optimistic. I am, however, hopeful, and maybe I'll say a word about Taiwan here, because I think this is the story. This is the bit of the research for the book that made me really go from a level of going, this is happening everywhere, and there's stories everywhere, and wherever you look, this is, but it's Taiwan that makes you go, this can take hold at a nation level. A nation of 23 million people can go in a matter of 4 or 5 years from being essentially a sort of technocrat authoritarian state to being a participatory citizen-driven society. And I'll give the broad brushstrokes. You'll have to read the book, people, for the whole story. But the broad brushstrokes, essentially, sort of in 2012. But like I say, there's a sort of technocrat authoritarian kind of leaning government that was starting to build much closer links with mainland China, and came out with its economic power up plan that essentially said, shush little people, just go shopping, like we'll sort the tricky stuff. And in that light, and with all the sort of reverberations around the world the previous year, a group of hackers started to form together, and they started to build parallel websites to government websites, and they called themselves GovZero because the URLs of these websites were .g0v.tw, and they offered the opportunity to people to actually sort of participate in shadow decision-making processes facilitated by these sites. And the audience wasn't huge, but it was growing, and And then 2014 came along, and the government tried to rush through a trade bill with China. And this triggered an Occupy-style protest, student protest, that has become known as the Sunflower Revolution. And the students occupied the legislature. And what the hacker movement did was it was the students more than the hackers, although obviously there's an overlap. And the hacker movement brought a broadband connection into the legislature and started streaming footage of what the students were doing all over the country. And what they were doing was debating the clauses of the trade bill. And then the critical moment, and this goes to some of what I've hinted at so far, the critical moment came when the Speaker of the Parliament was asked by the President and Prime Minister to boot them out. He was a member of the same party. It's in a similar way to our Speaker as a member of a party who sort of sets aside his. This was a sort of old guy, kind of establishment figure, and what he did was he said, no, this is what democracy looks like. This is what this place is for.
And you said this is in the book. It's Speaker Wang, was it?
Speaker Wang.
Yeah.
And he said this, and he said this is what it's for. And in that moment, he shifted the story. Like I mean, yes, everyone else had shifted the story too. It wasn't all that, but without him doing that, and from there, Taiwan has transformed. Like within a year, Audrey Tang, who was one of the lead hackers of GovZero, had become a mentor to a government minister, and several other members of GovZero had as well. Within 2 years, Audrey had become a minister themselves after another presidential election. Presidential hackathons started where all over the country, where people were kind of coming up with ideas to solve the country's problems, not necessarily technological, but just. And then when COVID hit, the response was a national team effort. I mean, to the extent that one of the stories I tell in the book is that they set up a phone line where any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better, with a voicemail recorded by the president herself. And these ideas are kind of using the technology that's available, kind of processing these ideas and bringing them through. Like a 6-year-old boy rang in with an idea and ended up on the national press conference 3 days later. Like this it's just a phenomenally different expression of what it is to face something, right? And this, I guess, and from this, I guess, I don't just draw inspiration because it's a nation scale. I also draw inspiration because I think what Taiwan's success in response to COVID, despite their context, I think also carries it's just better. Right, like, and this I think is what gives me most hope. Like, it's actually a better hypothesis for how to run a society successfully and well and in a flourishing way. Like, if you tapping into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone actually gets you better outcomes. And I think this is true in business and in NGO world as well. It's but I think. Maybe the last thing I'll say, sorry, the danger with me, Chris, as you know, is like you press a button and I'm like, so much. But the danger, really the deepest danger, and where I chose to kind of end the book, isn't so much. Is really what I kind of land up on calling a hero complex, right? Like it's the psychological barrier as much as anything. It's the fact that the journey to get into the positions that people like Speaker Wang are in is one that tends to condition us to try and have the answers, to know what's right for people to do, rather than to do what Audrey did and what Speaker Wang did, which is to hold the space and open up and invite ideas in and be a facilitator rather than a kind of hero. And I think that conditioning is very deep and very powerful. And like I feel it myself, right? Like part of what I want to say in the book and why I think I might be a useful voice is that like there's no one who gets a hero complex in our society today more than poshly educated 40-odd-year-old 6-foot-tall white men, right? Hi, and I think that the kind of the like naming that and going like, no, like we can't be that in this story. If we want this story, we're gonna have to shed that. I think is a big part of this.
Okay, so I really want to open this up because I'm sure people want to comment, they want to join in, they want to ask things. But before that, I just want to ask you, you said one of the things you were particularly sorry about is that Chris Seeley isn't here for this book launch. And I know she played a huge part in your journey and in what brought about this book. And I just wonder, so say something about that. I think it's worth dwelling on.
Yeah, I still sorry, I'm welling up immediately. So it goes back actually. So I mentioned the RBP and going to do that course in around 2008 and it holding the space for me, and the whole course, it wasn't Chris and Tim Malnick and all of my sort of cohort on that course were huge parts of this too, and you and others in that network. But there was a moment right at the beginning of the end of the first, so the way the course was structured, for those who don't know anything about it, and I know there are several RBP folk on this call, but several alumni on this call, but the way the course was structured was it was a week intensive workshop every 3 months or so for a couple of years. And there was this moment, Chris was my tutor, and we had a little learning group and 4 of us and a tutor. And at the end of the first week, we did an exercise where we were sort of, I don't know, collaging or something. And it was, and I can't remember what prompted it, but I was having a conversation with Chris where I was like, I was like really angry and frustrated, and I was like, I came on this course to get a set of rules to play by. Like I came on this course to figure out like how to act in the world now. Like I've been working in advertising. I know that, I feel like I know that's not right, and I know, and I want, like, I did a master's course to be taught, right? Like I want to know how to do this, and I don't want to fucking collage, frankly. and she said to me, she just, like, you know, I mean, you guys knew each other incredibly well, and she just had this incredible mischievous personality, and she just had this little kind of grin on her face, and she was like, and she just said something like, "What if there are no rules?" And I just burst into tears. It was really bizarre, but like, as I say, having been kind of brought up sort of and been a success, right? Like having got straight A's and gone to Cambridge and rode for Cambridge and been the jock and been the school captain and all of this stuff, I was like, people give me a set of rules and I play by them and I win, right? That's who I am and how I do. And in that moment, she was just like, "Nah, fuck that."
Yeah.
And it was, it was she, and yeah, there were so many moments like that. But that was
lovely. You know, it reminds me. I mean, I worked for Chris for 10 years, and it was a lovely privilege to do it. And one of my favourite moments for me was she introduced the word transgressive into the, transactional, transformational. Said, forget that bullshit. You need transgressive. There is something. I always think organisations. I'm not sure organisations are thoroughly in the consumer story. I think they sell into the consumer story, but they run themselves quite often on the subject story. And a lot of what Chris and I did, and I've done since as a result, is trickster work, balancing on the edge of the subject story to be transgressive enough to change something, but not so transgressive, get a head cut off. And I think that's where the hope of this book is. In many ways, it makes some of that transgressive work visible and doable by having, you talk about was it 7 modes of participation, and you talk about the various steps to change a story, and in that I could see tons of the MSc and your subsequent experience flowing through, and it's done in a way that's not doctrinaire, and I think that makes it's not academic.
Thank you.
That's the power of it, I think.
I hope that's the case, and I think one of the things I really took from Chris as much from her presence and her sort of attitude to the world and to life was the idea of like, I always remember the phrase like holding it lightly, and I think there's like that's some of what I really struggle to do, but some of what I'm trying to do in this is, and it was funny writing, my writing partner, kind of coach who I've put on she's co-credited on the cover of the book, Ariana Conrad, and people should check out the other stuff she's done. She's been involved in some amazing work, but and she's got quite a kind of Chris-like energy, but we had this funny thing where she would be like, I'd go off and write something and she'd be like, no, thesis, John, and kind of and sort of and pull me away from trying to sort of be sort of doctrinaire. So yeah, hopefully I've done some of that, but if I have, it's very much in Chris's honor and with Ariana and you and others sort of prodding me to do it.
Okay, I mean, let's if it's okay by you, John, we'll invite others to just join in at this point. I'm sure there's about 300 other questions I want to ask you, but I shouldn't ask them all. We should let other people join in. And it doesn't have to be questions. It can be comments, observation, anything you want, really.
Didn't think you'd be quiet for long, Rob.
I don't think I've ever been quiet for this long in my life, actually. Spellbound, man. Absolutely spellbound. David Abrams style, you know, spell of the sensuous, language, magic. I'm almost awestruck. And I just want to say, you and I talked when you first started this whole thing, or, you know, explicitly, John, in Bristol, when you ran an event, I think it was at the Create Centre, talking about, you know, citizens or consumers. Do you remember? And as a recovering copywriter, I was able to say, you know, yeah, I've got that disease as well, you know, that coming out of ad agency blues. But actually, I think you have communicated them. We both were trained by the corporates, you know, to drive consumerism and to cut through, as you say, all the competing messages from other consumerism driving forces. You've done it fucking brilliantly, and I just want to say, I can't think really. Chris done good, you know. She drove that trickster gene meme thing to your amazing, capacious cerebellum and soul, and it's rocking, and I love you. Thank you.
That was a gentler heckle than I was expecting. Thanks, Rob.
Can I just say something, John, because I was really struck by your Taiwan story, and it made me think about New Zealand, you know, and this whole thing that Jacinda Ardern did around Team New Zealand and that kind of thing. And it was only when you told the Taiwan story that I suddenly thought, excuse me, gosh, actually that was pretty subject rather than citizen, because although it was Team New Zealand, it was Team New Zealand, we're in it together. You're going to do what you're told to do. And I just hadn't had that perspective before about, so it was in the messaging rather than in the actioning. It's still very top down.
I think that's exactly right, Philippa. And I talk a bit about New Zealand just in the beginning of the book, because I think it's, well, just to say, first of all, that Arden actually explicitly on the 15th of March, bizarrely, that I know that date. So on the 3rd of March 2020, the Taiwanese published a journal, an article in the English language in a world medical journal with 124 actions they'd already taken by that time. This was 9 days before, well, it was like 3 weeks before our government even acted. And by that time they'd taken these 124 actions, including setting up the phone line and And Ardern's actually gave a press conference on the 15th of March where she said, we are adopting the Taiwan model. So to the extent that New Zealand did the same as Taiwan, it was directly inspired by it. And so it's so weird to me that no one has told the story of Taiwan. But anyway, but exactly as you say, it's actually, the way it's actually manifest has been very kind of use that language to dress something else up. And what I talk about in the book is like that there is this there's so much in New Zealand that could have unlocked more of this and could still, and I'm not uber critical of Arden, because I think she's wonderful in many ways. I think she's and she's more likely than almost anyone, but there's this collective in Wellington in New Zealand called called Inspiral, sorry, who have been one of the leading kind of digital participation collectives all over the world. They've got outposts in almost every country, and Inspiral weren't involved at all by they are New Zealand's GovZero. They are the world's GovZero. They were GovZero before GovZero was GovZero, and no one spoke to them. No one let them in. And it is just fascinating, the like, and I think it speaks, this speaks to me to the kind of the critical, what the nature of that power is. And again, the Speaker Wang thing, like, I think so many of these moments come in individual organizations, in nations, and more of them are going to come as the fractures and the cracks kind of open further. But but they have to be taken. And I think, like, some people have criticized me and sort of thrown and sort of argued with me that I'm giving too much. Like, it's all about the outsider, and it's all about building the energy in communities, and it's all about and that will be the force that changes the world. And I'm like, yes, and not. It's like, and the door, and that has to be seen and open to and allowed to be part of it. And I think that's what's different. I think that would be the challenge to the New Zealand government, as almost the same challenge as it is to our own.
I'll say something and ask something, John. You know how over the years I found your ideas really powerful and ended up questioning them a lot, and kind of building on them from a distance without us ever really having talked in great depth about it. And I'm really curious if you could say a little bit more about describing the behaviours of a citizen, and I use that word intentionally, the behaviours of a citizen as opposed to a consumer or a subject. And I wonder where that would lead us.
So, thanks, James. Nice to see you. It's been a while. The behaviours of a citizen, I think, are. So one of the things the reason I'm pausing is because there's sort of two levels to this. There's the sort of, some people talk about it as top down and bottom up, and I sort of prefer to talk about it as inside out and outside in. And I think there are behaviours on both sides of that, and often we're the same people but in different parts of our lives, right? But I think the first thing I would say is, like, because I'm sometimes asked, like, what's the best thing an individual can do? Like, isn't it like, and in the consumer story, I think a lot of the actions and behaviours that are asked of us if we're trying to be good are like, we almost have to be perfect. And some of what I really liked about this story, this idea of the citizen story, is I think it says you don't have to be perfect. You are. It accepts that we are in the context we're in, and we have to we have to live, and we have to put our own oxygen mask on first, and we have to survive sometimes. But the biggest thing an individual can do, I think, is be less of an individual. It's like, it's finding others. So the behaviours of a citizen, I think, start with, and I talk about this in the book, start with identifying the domain in which we can be a citizen. Like, a citizen is always in context. And so whether that's the organization you're part of, the community, the geographic community you're part of, like understanding what home means to you, and what you're going to shape, and then finding others, and sort of coming together, I think is those are the key behaviors of a citizen. And I think it's useful to contrast those with the key behaviors of a consumer, which are sort of even a positive consumer, an ethical consumer, which are to sort of change my own little world. It's like, get out of that own little world is the first prompt to a citizen. And then I think from the inside out, which, as I say, is almost for me the primary focus, I think it's make space, invite in, ask questions, open, like, admit, like, show space. And I think so. yeah, I think that's probably the way I would answer it. Prod me more if that's not specific enough.
So when you're talking about open show space, I'm hearing that as kind of curiosity and be available to the fact that the story I have at the moment, the way I'm behaving, there may be other ways I can do it, and it's not set.
I think yes, but explicitly, even more than that, like explicitly ask questions. Like don't. So I'm trying to think how far to go. Like so, maybe. So if I think so, what we the second half of the book essentially is a kind of toolkit for organizations, and I talk about the and it goes back to this idea of a kind of hero complex. I think two organizations, even in the sort of change the world version of the consumer story, try and do it for people and be sort of and be heroic, and again and it comes back to these, it's still using the kind of the structures and tools and mind models of the consumer story. So organizations are still at some level trapped in things like the 4 Ps of marketing, the kind of product, price, promotion, placement. Even if you're thinking about like how to change the world, you're still thinking like, what's my product, what's my, and what I offer in the book is this framework that we've started to play with, which is where we talk about the 3 Ps of participatory organizations being purpose, platform, and prototype. So and each comes with a corresponding question. So what are you trying to do in the world? What structures and for purpose, and sometimes we even articulate as well, what are you trying to do in the world that's so big that you need people to help you do it? You can't do it for them or do it on your own. And then platform is basically, how do you invite them to help? Like what structures and processes and spaces do you create that make it joyful and meaningful? Not necessarily easy, but joyful and meaningful to be part of that work. And then prototype is like, how do you start, right? Like where are you already doing it? Where's the energy? Like how do you set it rolling? Because you can't flip a switch and change everything overnight. So I think I'm not just saying be curious and be open. I'm actually saying be actively inviting, be sort of call people in, like go in a direction and hold your question about the world explicitly and ask for help. Like that I think is what a citizen does, because a citizen sees others as citizens too. A citizen sees other people. So what you seek to do is create the opportunity for them to do so, rather than seeing them as inherently kind of selfish, kind of self-interested creatures who need to be sort of sold to and somehow have their self-interest channeled to the greater good.
Yeah, and John, you know, as I'm listening to you here, I'm thinking, yeah, and it's a hell of a knife edge here, in that, you know, I hear all of that and I think, gosh, it would be so easy for that to become advocacy, to become, you know, a missionary statement about a new story that could be quite without the right ethics and without the right reflective practice, could become just another elite. Right? Because some people might be quite good at citizening if they didn't have the genuine participatory practice you're talking about. You know, would be quite easy for it to be, what's the word, appropriated or something.
Yeah, kind of cool. I mean, I think that's I guess this is a bit of one of the edges of the learning and the thinking for me. This is this thing of like what happened, like what co-opts what. So one of the examples I talk about, another of the examples I talk about in the book is Brewdog, the Scottish brew company, and in a lot of ways they've like really done amazing stuff on this. Like like a lot of the 7 modes of everyday participation that you mentioned, they practice. Like they open source all their recipes. They they teach people. They've got a Cicerone qualification. They've got equity punks who own part of the company. And yet there's this sort of there is this sense of that energy being co-opted and channeled, and I could go like there are darker versions as well. Like I'd argue that that actually there's some really interesting stuff about QAnon in the US and increasingly here, which suggests that like what QAnon, the part of the reason QAnon is so successful is because it is deeply participatory. It gives people a mission and a purpose and a sense of agency in their purpose. Like you're part of the collective, trying to wheedle out the kind of the evil conspiracy that's taking over the world. And I guess my response to that is kind of, yeah, and that's sort of why we have to do it faster and do it more authentically, because like people are, if we are by nature kind of, we need to be involved, we need agency, we need to do stuff, and that is that sort of that withholding of power rather than the withholding of material circumstance is the sort of greatest challenge of our time, and so people will find that power, and those who would corrupt stuff and seek their own ends will use some of these tools and methods, unless. But I mean, just to end the answer to that on a kind of on a joyful note, one of my favorite things from what the Taiwanese have done, which is which actually didn't make it into the book, but they did their response to, so the sort of Chinese disinformation kind of army is hugely active in Taiwanese social media and so forth all the time, and trying to sort of seed these conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. And what the Taiwanese have done is they call their strategy out-meming. And their approach is basically they post disinformation memes as soon as they treat the whole nation as scouts for disinformation memes and ask them to be sent in. And then when they're sent in, they effectively set challenge prizes to create memes and social media assets that are more sticky and more shareable than the disinformation that outcompete. And their idea of how to outcompete is by tapping into the creative energy and spirit of everyone in the country. And so I think there's I just sort of I like that. I think that's a really powerful sort of statement of like the best way to beat the QAnons and so forth is actually to be really to be open and to figure out how to make the best of our time together. And I think you have to sort of trust people for that. This was one of the I wanted to share with, like the moment in my work that I in this research, like the Taiwanese story was like the one that made me most excited. But there was a moment in the research. I interviewed Audrey Tang, the hacker turned minister. And at one point in the conversation, I said, God, the people of Taiwan must really trust the government in order for this to be possible. And the response was no. And I was like, what? She was like, we actively don't want people to trust the government because people trust the government in China. And I was like, And then she said, and then what she said was, what we care about is that the government trusts people.
Yeah. Jon, if I can, so I noticed that Shadi has got her hand raised. Can we invite you to come in now?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Jon. I just want to say this is a great start to my morning, so thank you. It's such a lovely breakfast and then having this discussion. I was actually thinking about maybe what you're doing is you're challenging us to each figure out what is our way of being a citizen, right? And maybe there isn't an answer, just like what worked for Taiwan may not work for other countries. What works for me may not work for others. And maybe that's the challenge. We each have to take responsibility and figure it out for ourselves, right? I mean, I found that what works for me is simple compassion for all living beings. If I can be compassionate in every conversation, every approach, that seems to work for me. But I suppose the challenge could be, here's an idea, don't let me be treating you as subject and telling you you should do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll be a citizen. Figure it out, which is harder, right? But it just made me think about that.
It's a lovely reflection. Thank you, Shadi. I don't feel like I should sort of answer it with a thing to do, but I just endorse it. I think if there is like what I hope, I think like yes. So I agree with you in a sense that it's maybe harder in the sense that you sort of have to step into your own agency, shape it how you want to shape it. That's part of the point. And find others and figure out what you want to do together rather than sort of follow these 10 ways to change the world for a $5 kind of things. But I also think it's also easier and more, or maybe at least more generative of energy. Like I think I don't know about you or others, but I've found trying to be good as a consumer, as it were, or in the consumer story, pretty exhausting, because you sort of feel like you always have to do everything right and you can't ever be naughty or whatever, because you're then those who would sustain things as they are tend to say, oh well, you're not purest of pure, so well, how can you tell me what to do? And I think that the citizen thing offers you a way of behaving a bit differently in that, and saying, no, let's build the energy. No, like whatever. Like there's this lovely website that I would encourage people to check out called The Bad Activist, that's been started by some of the youth activists, youth climate activists, and there is this thing of like I'm not perfect. I don't do everything right. I like nice stuff sometimes. I want to play, and I think there's something of that in this that's just like, you don't have to get everything right, but if you step into your agency and go, no, I'm going to try and build, I think, and I'm going to invite others in, and I'm going to try and make something, and rather than I have to be perfect and in order to then criticize others. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, John,
yes.
In just a moment we'll go to Yuri, but there's a couple of questions or comments in the chat which I think are well worth a look at. And I know you like the big historical sweep. So one is from Nikki about, does the UK's history with monarchy and colonialism make this particularly difficult here? And then there's a comment from Jenny, which I won't read all the way out, but it is about the African context, the particular extension of the subject phase because of colonialism, and the inherent state of Ubuntu, which I think are also really interesting points. I wonder, how you react to that.
I'm just trying to read the full, because I think lovely. Okay, so yes, I mean, part of where I got, I think when I went into writing the book, I was talking about just the last century or so, and I was like, collapse of subject, rise of consumer, and the more I got into the research of the book, the more I was like, geez, this subject story was around for a while. But I also began to sort of was trying to understand, like, is the citizen a new thing? And I was like, no, like this is deep in us. And actually, I mean, Ubuntu is just one form of it. I came like across the world. Like, I think this is, the more I dug into it, the more I got excited of, like, and the more I went into indigenous wisdom and the idea, and like Tyson Yunkaporta's work, for example, in Sandtalk, and like this idea that and there's this lovely phrase in the literature of democracy, campfire democracy, like that actually the way we made decisions as hunter-gatherers was sat around a campfire, kind of figuring out what the hell to do, like with every voice kind of valued, and I think and having processes to make sense of that. And I think there's without being kind of and there's in the book I talk about the idea that actually, like, the subject story was pretty much born with the first walls and the first kings, and I go back to Sargon of Akkad in sort of 2500 BC, and like who sort of created a lot of the architecture of that subject story from then, and it's sort of stayed with us all the way through to the British Empire. And in some ways, I think sort of playing to what you were saying about the work you and Chris did together, like in some ways, I think the consumer story is really just a sort of a dressing up of the subject story, a kind of a disguising of it. But yes, I mean, all of which is really to say, like, the way I now see it is that we are, as I've said a couple of times, we are by nature citizens, and actually the indigenous wisdom is much closer to that than any sort of more sort of, I don't know, any of us are today, and what we and yet it surges through history. So in the book, some of what I do is sort of trace, like, actually reframing Athenian democracy as a kind of a surging of the citizen story, and then it dropping away again. The Putney debates in England as a surging of the citizen story and a dropping away again. Even the Golden Age pirates as a surging of the citizen story and a dropping away again. And if you see it like that, then you're more kind of going, like, this is in us all the time, and there is a particular opportunity in this moment in time with the technologies and the point in history that we're at, where it genuinely could, at the scale of a modern nation state, at the scale of a global society, actually could be the way we organize. And I think that so just very quickly say, yes, I think we have a particular issue with it in Britain, because we were the kind of the sort of the pinnacle nation of the subject story, the nation that held 25% of the world or whatever when at the peak of empire, and we struggle to shake that off. But equally, the US is arguably the sort of the hub nation of the consumer story. But and I really just want to offer into that a really lovely some work that you might want to check out. A friend of mine, Alex Evans, and David Stephen did some work they called the long crisis scenarios, and they talk about sort of 4 scenarios that quite nicely map to the sort of subject consumer citizen thing. And one of the things they do is talk about so if in the current society we have the G7, in this consumer story we have the G7 and the G20 or whatever, in a subject story you might have the G1 or the G2. In a citizen story, or they describe it differently, but in a citizen story you would have something like the G infinity, like like not the G0 that Ian Bremmer has talked about, and people have, like, big political economists have sort of said, oh, there's going to be chaos, but actually the sort of the meaningful distribution, kind of pluriverse distribution, and I think that is really exciting.
Okay, now I do want to go to Yuri, because you've been waiting patiently for a long time.
Listening, very interested. Thank you, Jon, for the inspiring story. And I wondered on a bit more practical level, no offense meant there, but I work a lot with organizations and also with local governments and national governments here in the Netherlands. And yeah, I'm immediately inspired to sort of invite them into this citizenship story. And I wondered, because it can be quite radical, what you have learned in the past years on how to really get them to step into maybe the radical part of it, or to actually really practice and live it, and what you've learned, what is helpful in a change practitioner or whatever you call yourself to do that or invite that.
I'm sort of the reason I'm basically, we've done a little bit of work in local authorities, and I get very excited about this space specifically. So like, I'm trying to think, like, the answer at the sort of how we've done the work or versus the actual work, and I'm like, there's some really, I mean, there's some lovely, I think just briefly at slightly more general level, I think, like, some of what we've done has been, and what I've found really powerful, has been sort of trying to help people name and articulate the theories of change that they are working with and that aren't working as a starting point, and really, like, calling those out, because it's only then that there's a sort of hunger for, like moving on. So, and then the work we've done with local authorities to make that really tangible, we've sort of gone like, actually the implicit theory of change here is we provide services, people use services, and the place gets better. But actually, like, if you really name it, it's we provide services, people use services, the place gets shitter, but we don't get blamed because we haven't done anything wrong. And when you sort of surface that and name that, it's the relief is like palpable. And then you start to go like, okay, so what might the theory of change be? What might be possible? And the subject consumer citizen framework is pretty helpful, particularly in this context, because you're like, oh, well, local government started out as local authorities in the subject story, telling people what to do, being the kind of, and then it became a service provider in the consumer story. So what might it be in the citizen story? And then, so you have a kind of, it's like, back to Rebecca Solnit, like that clarity and imagination combination, right? Like it's, what are we doing and what might we do? And then there's loads of fun to be had in sort of surfacing, like, for me, in local government, it's like, what if the theory of change was more like, we create the conditions and hold the space, people make their own places better, and actually the place thrives and gets better. Like, and how do you do that work? It then becomes the question. And then there's all sorts of fun to be had in like the actual shit. And just like, I really like and again, this sort of goes a step further than what's in the book, but I really like the idea of working. We've begun to develop the idea of working with narrative, rituals, and totems. It's like, what's the story the organization tells itself about what it is in the world? Just sort of, are you a service provider, authority, enabler? Like, what is the story? And then like, rituals are sort of, what are the day-to-day things that carry that story? So in the National Trust, when we did loads of work there, and we were doing work on like moving from sort of places in absence of people to putting the people to celebrating people's relationship with place. And so the little things like changing the photography in the meeting rooms so that they weren't just like nice shots of places, but were photographs of people enjoying places. And actually that really matters. And like, so many local government buildings have no people in them, or no presence of the local people, because they're sort of, and then there's the totem stuff, which like what big things carry the story. And like with the trust, that we like rebranded a whole staff code. There's stories in the book, but my favorite in local authority context I came across just recently is in New York City. I'll post the link in the chat because it's so cool that everyone should check it out. There's a thing called the New York City in the aftermath of the initial COVID, of the initial pandemic. They did a thing called the People's Bus and the Ice Cream Truck of Rights, where they basically took back an old prison bus and turned it into a touring party, and went and took it everywhere where mutual aid had been most active in New York City, which was mostly the poorest neighborhoods, and just put on this amazing celebration, and then had this ice cream truck where the flavors of ice cream were named after different after the rights and the ways of organizing that were available to people. And it's just this, like, it's such a, when I say totem, what I mean is like this sort of symbolic, quite visible sort of carriers of the story of how you want to be. So you don't have to change everything overnight, but if you pay attention, if you understand the story you're trying to live in, you sort of you pay attention to the small stuff, and then you do one or two of these things. Like, that for me is the sort of transformative stuff. I hope that is a bit more tangible.
Yeah, and I just want to say, as someone who I read the book over the last couple of days, I just want to say it is full of really practical stuff, both practical stories from different kinds of organizations. So there's a section on citizens NGOs, citizens business, and there's a whole toolkit of things to do to change the stories. I've had an enormously accessible and practical book. So we're at about 1:45. We have a few more minutes if there are more comments and questions. I want to make sure that we give space for them if there are. And if not, I have one that I want to ask before the end, but I don't want to ask it before others are done. So I want to know what next for you, Jon, in all this. Because you sent this to print, some time ago. What's the story after the book?
The honest answer is I don't really know. As I was saying to Chris and Philippa and Rick before we open the room, I feel like I'm in a kind of weird purgatory at the moment, where I sent the book off to print a bit before Christmas, and the bloody thing still isn't out in the world, if you'll excuse my language, and now it's not going to be, like, it was supposed to be out next week, as Philippa said, and it's not, and because of delays at printers and so forth, it's not out until mid-March. I'm like, just get out in the world, like, come on. And I have as you can probably tell, a restless energy in that moment. But part of it is because it's very hard to know, like, and as a first-time author, like, will people hear about this? Will the word spread? Will it take hold? Because so many books are published all the time, and I don't know. And so I think, I mean, I have ideas of where I might go, like the new citizenship project. We might want to try and take that to another level. There are already, just in this sort of pre-launch phase, people starting to find the ideas and want to sort of do more with them. There's really interesting work going on things like the Global Assembly, if people don't know, sort of ideas for kind of the new institutions that might be the equivalent of the Bretton Woods that that helped make the consumer story what it was, that I'm interested in. But I think, I mean, in a sense, I'm trying to stay in this moment, and sort of see what comes a bit, like, and it may be that these 20 people, these 20 hardy souls, who've stayed with us for an hour and 15 minutes are the only ones who care, and that would be great, because these are 20 wonderful people who might do fascinating things with some of the ideas, and I'd love to help them. Or it might be that it explodes, and I just don't know. So sorry, a long and rambling answer, but it's because I don't know, and I'm sort of, I find that quite uncomfortable, and I think I have, and I'd appreciate advice and so forth on this in this moment. But I think I do try and have a bit of Chris Seeley. I have her picture, and I have the card that went round with her poem, and I sort of think with it sometimes, and I think what she would say is, like, stay playful and stay in it, and, like, see what comes.
Along with give it a go, why not?
Yeah,
give it a go.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. I just want to say, I mean, first of all, Jon, an enormous. Oh, James, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit slow on these things sometimes. I wonder if there's space for one more question.
Yeah, go for it. Give it a go.
I was just reflecting on what you're saying about the speaker in Taiwan. And I wondered, in your interview with her, whether you identified what allowed her to step back and facilitate, as opposed to trying to become the hero. Because as we're talking, that strikes me as rather important. And I'm interested in the conditions that we can help create by our own behaviour of being like that.
So just for clarity, there were sort of two separate people. Audrey, who's the hacker turned minister, who sort of embodies this idea of being a channel and opening things up and so on. And then the Speaker of the Parliament, who is Speaker Wang, who is a basically old guy, establishment figure, right, yeah, who created the opportunity.
So I'm interested in him. I think that was my question, was about him then rather than her. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. I think that corresponds to, like, I think that absolutely, I think you're right, like that is absolutely the nub of it, like, because I think in a way we all of us are Audrey, to some extent, like this is the, like we will do this stuff, we will build, we will do, but what it requires is the speaker wangs to open the door. I think I guess like there's more on this, and there's a lot on this in the book, and the last section is called How to Be an Anti-Hero, which is sort of the appeal to those people. I think the other bit that I think I want to sort of bring up here is that there's some really powerful stuff. Bayo Komolafe talks about, like, it's in sort of in like trying to break down the prison walls that they sustain their shape. And I think like those attacking isn't what it is. Like, it's the young, like what you resist persists as well, right? Like I'm really interested in how that change in Taiwan happened by creating the system that and focusing the attention on that building, and then sort of leaving the door open, not an accusatory space. I was really struck when I was interviewing Audrey how she was like, so the first piece I wrote about Taiwan, I was quite angry with the British government, and she was like, if you like, we'll get behind you, we'll help you, but you need to like tone that down a bit, because that's what will allow them to evolve into this. And I think so. Maybe a thought experiment for you that I've been playing with. Like, I wonder what might have happened in Britain if Extinction Rebellion had played a bit differently. If after that moment, the first rebellion, when my mum loved Extinction Rebellion, was thinking about going and occupying Waterloo Bridge, like, what if in that moment they hadn't, when a citizens' assembly was commissioned but didn't have the characteristics they wanted it to have, we wanted it to have, that it was then ignored, but there was a citizens' assembly. What if XR had gone yes and to that, and held their rebellions on the weekends that assembly met, and pointed at it and gone, this is what democracy looks like, this is what we need, and been saying, like, that then and made it impossible to ignore. That I know I'm answering a quite a specific question with a story, as it were, but I think that expresses the sort of thing I'm talking about. Like, how might we demonstrate and build and point at and make impossible to ignore the way things might be, and put as much energy as we can into that work, and understand that, yeah, there are some horrible behaviors manifesting in our current leadership, but at least in part that's sort of come from like being stuck in stories that no longer work, rather than and then going too far down the paths of those stories, rather than being sort of intentionally and then needing to attack them. I feel it's hard to answer, but that's some of where I want to go.
So James, I just want to check, do you want to say something in response?
Thank you. You can tell that, couldn't you? Thanks, Chris. John, thank you. It feels like this is really messy ground, and I think you're talking a lot to compassion about those who don't have the power towards those who do have the power. And I think about the work we learned about on what was it, the pedagogy of the oppressed and things, and you're talking about having compassion. I think there's something I think it's worth exploring more here, and how we can, each of us, behave in ways in our daily lives which encourage this. That when I'm listening to you, that's what occurs to me, and create the models of how we behave in that way. So I'd be really up for another conversation about that, I think, with anybody else who's interested as well.
Yes. Let there be such a conversation. That'd be good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I suppose my response to this is to come back to your final page of the book and your final paragraph. I think it might be the final paragraph, where you have that quote, which is, what would you do in this time if you truly believed in yourself and in those around you? I think it was a fantastic question for people, well, folks anywhere, but any leader, anybody in organization, anybody activist in something. What would you do in this time if you truly believed in yourself and in those around you? And it half channels Mary Oliver, and it half channels Donella Meadows. There's a lot of Meg Wheatley in it, and part of the answer to that, of course, is Chrissy's give it a go. Why not? Jon, thank you for doing this morning. Thank you so much. It was great, and made a book be a wonderful success, and made a world change as a result.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. And yeah, James and others. Yeah, more conversations, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. And can I just say to everybody, I will probably write a little reflective piece and send it out to everybody who registered, along with the link to the recording. So we won't do anything public with the recording wider than the people who registered for the call. But I think it's useful to share it for the folks who are here or who registered but couldn't come, or who left early, that kind of thing, if that's okay with everybody. If there's any real problem with that, you absolutely don't want that to happen, email Rick, who you registered with, and we will make sure that we do whatever you need. Meanwhile, thank you. We will write to you shortly.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks. Bye.